Shalom. Today we're going to discuss a grammatical function in Hebrew, which is called the construct state. Sometimes it's called noun pairs, and in Hebrew it's called smichut. We were going to look into this. So the word smichut comes from this root, samech mem kaf. Smichut, in Hebrew, it's either construct or noun pairs. We don't want to confuse this with smicha, which is rabbinical ordination, and we'll look into the verb to see why both these things have the same root. The root is Strong's number 8 for Hebrew, 5564. So we see in Exodus 29:10, "And you shall cause a bullock to be brought before the tabernacle of the congregation, and Aaron and his sons shall put their hands upon the head of the bullock." The concept here is that they are transferring the sin of the people to the animal which is about to be slaughtered. 2 Kings 18:21. "Now, behold, you trust upon the staff of this bruised reed, even upon Egypt, on which if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt unto all that trust on him." So more than just putting their hand, they are actually leaning on, in this case, the staff of Egypt. It can be leaning on anything. In Psalm 3, verse 5, "I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for Yehovah sustained me." So more than just leaning on Yehovah, he gives me the strength. Again, Psalm 145:14, "Yehovah upholds all that fall, and raises up all those that be bowed down." An even broader meaning in Isaiah 26:3, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, whose mind is relying on you, whose mind is leaning on you, because he trusts in you." So we can understand how this comes to be rabbinical ordination, how people would lay hands on the person receiving the ordination, and so some sense of authority is transferred in the laying on of hands, and that is smicha. In smichut, in the construct or the noun pairs, one noun kind of leans on the other, and so they're two next to each other always. This is one of the ways used to express possession. I've written this of that. In Hebrew, there's no way to say David's book. We have to say the book of David, this of that. We're going to have the two nouns, the book and David, in a pair together. And there can be more than two nouns in a row that are in this state of the one leaning on the other for meaning. So there are 4 forms of the construct state, and the form of the noun, which will be declined, relies on the form that it appears grammatically. So we know there are some nouns that are feminine but they look masculine, or they look masculine but they are feminine. And then again, the same problem with the plurals. When we work with the smichut, when we work with the construct, we're going to work with the form that the noun is in, regardless of its actual gender. And we'll see some examples. In masculine singular nouns, either you will find no changes or small vowel changes. There are a few notable exceptions which we will go over in these examples. So you know the word for king is melech. Here in Exodus 1:8 we see Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim. This is just the king with an adjective. And there arose a new king over Egypt. In Genesis 14:1, we see the word melech. It looks exactly the same, but now it's in a noun pair, and the other noun that we're going to see with it is the name of a place. So we see, Vayehi b'mei Amraphel, melech Shinar. That becomes this of that, the king of Shinar. Arioch melech Elasar. Arioch is his name. He is the king of Elasar. There's no change in the form of melech, and the two nouns are just next to each other. This is how we read them. Kidula Omer, melech Elam. He is the king of Elam. Tidal melech Goyim. Tidal is his name. He is the king of maybe a place called Goyim, or maybe he's just the king of the nations. So the word melech, when it appears in a noun pair, It doesn't change at all. There's just two nouns, the king of whatever he's the king of. Now the word ben means son. In Genesis 4:25, we're going to see it as a noun by itself. Vayeda Adam od et ishto. And Adam again knew his wife. V'teled ben. And she bore a son. There's nothing else, no other information about it. This is the plain word for son, the way it usually appears. However, in Genesis 21:9, we're going to see it in a pair because he's the son of somebody. Vatereh Sarah et ben Hagar HaMitzrit. And she saw Sarah. Sarah saw et. Who did she see? Ben Hagar. It's the son of Hagar. So what is the difference between these two nouns, ben and ben? We see a slight vowel shift. Now, the word for hand is yad. It looks masculine. It is feminine. However, because it looks masculine, it's going to decline in a masculine sense. In other words, we're just going to see a very slight vowel shift. In Genesis 37:22, the boys are arguing about what to do with Joseph the dreamer. In the middle of the sentence we see, V'yad al tishlechu vo. And a hand should not cast him away. We'll just translate it like that. But there's a hand. It doesn't say whose hand. We have no information. But we see yad, and it is spelled with the kamatz. In Genesis 9:5, we're going to see that it's the hand of somebody. God is talking to Noah about a few laws about how they need to behave after they got off the boat. In the middle of the sentence we see, U miyad ha'adam, miyad ish echiv. And from the hand of the man, and the hand of also the man of his brother. So we see a very slight vowel shift here. The kamatz changes to the patach. It still sounds like yad. It sounds the same either way. We wouldn't know that there was a change in vowel except that we're looking at it. So this is typical for nouns, which appear to have masculine singular endings. It doesn't matter if they're masculine or not. They are going to decline in the same way. Very little vowel shift when they're going into smichut, into the construct state. This of that. Now we said there are a few exceptions. One of them is the word for father of. Ezekiel 10:20, in the end of the first line we see, Va'av lo yisa ba'avon haben. And a father will not bear the iniquity of the son. So this is just a plain father. We don't know whose father it is, any father. In Genesis 9:18, we see it's the father of somebody. And in this case, the noun picks up a yud. So talking about the descendants of Noah, starting from the last word of the first line, V'cham hu avi Chna'an. And Cham, he is the father of Canaan. So because these two nouns are in construct state, in smichut, we don't just use av, even though it's a masculine noun and it looks like one, it's a special case. It becomes avi, the father of. The same is true for the word ach, which means brother, in Genesis 24:29. Ula Rivka ach, ushmo Lavan. And Rivka had a brother. We don't know anything more right there. He's not the brother of anybody. He is her brother, but it's framed, and to Rivka belonged a brother. His name was Lavan. In Genesis 22:23, we see that we're going to talk about the brother of Abraham. Speaking of Nahor, at the end of the first sentence, it defines him, Achi Avraham. He's the brother of Abraham. So even though Ach is a masculine singular, it appears as one, but when we make it the brother of, it carries this yud with it, just like father does, the brother of. The other noun, which is very common, and is changed in the smichut, is the word bayit. The word bayit means house. In Deuteronomy 28:30, in the middle, we see bayit tivneh. You will build a house. It's not a house of anything, it's just the house. However, in Genesis 12:15, we're going to be talking about the house of Pharaoh. And we see that in the second line there, and it says Beit paro. So the bayit becomes beit in smichut, in the construct state. And there are many, many, many of these. There's about 50 Old Testament names. Beit Aven, Beit El, I'm sure you're familiar with Bethel, Beit Gader, Beit Gamul, blah, 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 Beit HaGilgal, very, very common. And also, of course, you know, Beit Lechem. Lechem means bread, and so we see that Bethlehem is the house of bread. Beit is in the smichut, it's this of that, the house of bread, which is lovely for the bread of the world to be born in the house of bread. There are also a few other New Testament ones which do not appear in the Old Testament, Bethsaida, Bethpage, and Bethani, and that is how they are translated into English. But it's going to be the house of something. So that is your masculine singular nouns. All nouns which look masculine singular, regardless if they're masculine or not. Either they will have a very slight vowel shift or no vowel shift, or we have these few exceptions. Father is Av, the father of is Avi. Ach is brother, the brother of is Achi. And bayit always shifts to beit. For feminine singular nouns tend to take two different forms. Some end in tav and some end in hey. For the ones that end in tav, you will not see any change in the smichut. In Genesis 30, verse 21, V'achar yalda bat, and afterwards she bore a daughter. In Genesis 24:24, we find out that's the daughter of somebody. V'tomer elav bat Betuel anochi, and she said to him, I am the daughter of Betuel. But we see that the bat in both cases looks exactly the same. This is because it's a female noun that ends in tav. Here's another example. The word for covenant is brit. It's a female noun. It ends in tav. B'yom hahu karat Yehovah et Abraham brit, from Genesis 15:18. In that day, Yehovah cut a covenant with Abraham. It's not a covenant of anything, it's just he cut a covenant. When we see it becomes a covenant of Yehovah, we see an example in Numbers 14:44. It is talking about the Ark of the Covenant of Yehovah. Aron, Brit Yehovah. Aron is a masculine singular. It looks like one, and so we see no change. And it's in smichut, it's in construct with the covenant. Brit looks the same. The covenant of Yehovah. Brit looks the same because it's feminine singular and there's no change. The ark of the covenant of Yehovah. Now for feminine nouns that end in hey, what happens in the construct state is that the hey changes to a tav and there might be some slight vowel shifts. In Esther 1:9, Gam Vashti Hamalka Asta Mishte, and Vashti, the queen, also made a party. So this is just the Malka. She's not the queen of anything. But when we get to 1 Kings 10:1, we see the very famous queen, Malkat Shva, the queen of Sheba. Remember, we're talking about this of that. The queen of Sheba. So if you compare the two spellings, you can see a slight vowel change, but the hey at the end of Malka shifts to tav. The biggest change we consistently see is in masculine plural nouns. And so nouns which have a masculine plural ending, regardless of whether they're masculine or not, and we'll see some examples, end in this ending im, which you know. What happens in the construct is that it loses the final hey, and the vowel changes to instead of I. It changes to tsere from chirik, and we'll see the examples. So in Genesis 5:4, talking about Adam, after he had sired Seth, he was so old, and at the end he bore sons and daughters. So you see this word for sons is banim, singular ben, plural banim. It doesn't tell us anything about the sons, they're just plain sons. But in Genesis 9:18, we're going to be talking about the sons of Noah, and that is Bnei Noach. They are the sons of Noah. So if you compare the Banim in Genesis 5 to the B'nai in Genesis 9, you see how the spelling shift takes place. You lose the final mem, and the vowel under the nun changes. And I'm sure you're familiar with the term B'nai Yisrael, right? That means the sons of, the children of Israel. Now, for example, the word Evan looks and sounds like a masculine noun, and it takes a masculine plural. In fact, it's a feminine noun, but the declension into smichut is going to follow the form, not the gender, but the form of the noun. So the plural of Evan is avanim. So in Genesis 31:46, we're just talking about stones. Liktu avanim, they gathered stones. V'yikhu avanim, and they brought the stones. V'ya'asu gal, and they made a pile. In Genesis 28:11, we see about the stones of the place. In the second line, Vayikach me avnei hamakom, and he took of the stones of the place. So you have the same shift. The final mem is dropped. The vowel under the nun changes from e, chirik, to a, tsere. About 95% of the words that you read that end in that format with the tsere and the yud are going to be masculine plural nouns in smichut, in construct state. A plural of something of belonging to something else. The horses of, the rivers of, the kings of, they're all going to have that same ending. There's a few exceptions. Most of the time when you're looking at that form, that tseri with that yud, it will be a masculine plural noun in smichut. Finally, we have the feminine plural nouns which end in ot. As you know, you will find either no changes or a very small vowel shift going into smichut. Again, we see that Adam had sons and daughters, banim uvanot. The vanot are the daughters. In Song of Songs 1:5, it's talking about the daughters of Jerusalem. It's a smichut, this of that. Benot Yerushalayim. If you compare, there's just a very slight vowel shift. Next time, we will look at the few exceptions that there are for words which end in tseri and yud, which look very much like smichut, but they're not. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you're enjoying your Hebrew studies as always. And until next time, tasim et ha'inayim al hashemayim, keep your eye on the sky. Your redemption draweth nigh. Shalom.